Well, here's another project. This thing's all rusty, and we have a little bit of a fondness for it, so we're going to try to clean it up, get the rust off, and get a decent coat of paint on it. Well, I've spent about 20 minutes or so with wire wheels knocking off a lot of the loose rust. There's still many nooks and crannies that I could not reach, and I could go at it with a wire wheel or similar device on a Dremel tool, which would get to more of it, but I still think there are some areas that I don't know how I would ever get to them. So I have two options. I can paint it with something that's made to go over red rust, which there are primers out there to do it, or I could try some other chemical stripping action, or I could try to find somebody with a sandblaster machine. Well, I gave it a good scrubbing with soap and water in the sink, and that cleaned it up a bit. And I dried it with a hairdryer to help inhibit any flash rusting from coming back, and it's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to try a chemical stripping technique. I'm going to use an acid, almost certainly vinegar. I think that'll do a better job of getting rid of a lot of the little bits of rust. Ideally, I'd like to use something like Evaporust, but I don't have nearly enough of it, and the stuff's rather expensive, and this just isn't that fancy of a piece. And I also thought about building an electrolysis tank, and again, I don't think this piece really justifies even that level of effort. So to chemically remove rust, there's kind of two camps. One of them is you immerse the piece in an acid, like vinegar or hydrochloric acid or ascorbic acid, or phosphoric acid. There's a whole bunch of them out there. And from what I gather, I'm not a chemist, but every acid seems to attack the red rust quite readily. This red flaky soft rust is known as hematite, and it's Fe2O3. And each acid seems to combine with it and turn it into something else that either settles out in or dissolves into solution. So I believe with vinegar it turns into ferric acetate or something like that. And with hydrochloric acid I think it turns it into ferric chloride or something. The bad thing is these acids also will eat away at the iron and steel. So you have to be a little bit mindful of that, particularly if you care about the piece in question. The other way to go would be to get something like an Evaporust, and that attacks rust through a process known as chelation. And I'm not quite sure what that is, but from what I can gather, it interacts with the rust with a slightly different chemical process, and that tends not to attack the iron or steel underneath. So it's a much safer way to go. It also tends to put, in my experience, a bit of a patina on the iron and steel, which again in this case would be great. But the downside is that stuff is, I think, too expensive for what I need for this project. So this is the container I have, and I have some of these containers filled with water to take up some of the volume. This will help clean out your sinuses. I'm just going to cover it with a couple of rags to keep the smell down. Okay, this has been going about a half hour. But I'm going to turn it, give me a look at it while I'm at it. Well, it's probably hard to see. I soaked this overnight in vinegar, this half of it, and this part up here I soaked for several more hours. And it did loosen a lot of the rust. I washed it down the drain when I rinsed it off. However, even using the hairdryer, I got a fair amount of flash rusting that I just had to spend 10 or 15 minutes knocking off. So I think this is ready for a primer. I don't know how well this is showing up, but you can see a lot of schmutz in the bottom of the bucket. Like I say, I think that's iron acetate or ferric acetate. Well, here's the setup. I took the time to build a little holder for it. Obviously I'd like to spray paint the entire thing at once if I can. And I'm planning on rinsing it down with a little bit of brake clean to get some of the loose rust that might still be on it to rinse away. And this stuff evaporates in a flash, and then I'll prime it with this stuff that's supposed to go on rusty metal. Well, here it is, primed and dry, looking pretty good. You can see the shadows have moved. I also moved this further away from my house. A little bit of the overspray was getting a little too close for my house for comfort, and that is not a desired effect. And I brought this in to photograph it. It's still a little tacky. This is the first coat and a half or so of black paint, and it's looking pretty good. You know, I've been painting these things, and I started out with this can because I had it, and it's empty now, and it worked fine, no issues with it. And I went and got this can, and this fancy spray nozzle is leaking like crazy. I mean, you know, look at my hands, they're just covered, and I even had a cloth handy just in case, and they're all covered. And out of habit, you know, whenever I'm using a rattle can, I shake it every couple minutes, and when I shook this, the paint got all over me, so it ruined the clothes that I'm wearing. And it's like, you know, gee whiz, how hard can it be to make a spray can these days? You know, really kind of ruin the whole day. I mean, I hate to seem like I'm endorsing or criticizing, but this was a failure. So I just spent about 15 minutes cleaning my hands with mediocre results, reasonably clean. But it's kind of annoying. I had this can for years. It sat on my shelf, and all I did was pop the cap off and finish using it. No issues. Worked fine. It's the old-fashioned spray nozzle. And it's kind of annoying. This guy's brand new, and it's got this fancy nozzle on it. And I suppose if I was spraying a car or a boat, I'd appreciate the more comfortable grip. But the fact that it leaks all over the place, not a good design. Cleaning up, I tried using Goo Gone. This didn't do much of anything. I tried using the Safe mineral spirits, and this didn't really cut into it either. I think by the time I had gotten around to cleaning, the paint had largely dried. So I ended up using a petroleum distillate paint thinner, and this cut it a heck of a lot better. And I got about 90% of it off, then a good scrubbing with soap and water and a brush did the rest. Well, here she is, all finished up. And I must admit myself, I think it came out pretty good. Turned out to be a fair amount of work. I wanted to avoid flash rusting that had to be removed, and I wasn't so successful at that. Crossed my mind I could have used something with phosphoric acid in it, like this stuff. From what I understand, phosphoric acid interacts with the rust and forms an inert coating that's primable and paintable, and maybe doesn't have to be removed like the flash rusting did in this particular case. But that's hindsight. As always, appreciate you stopping by. Hope you got something out of this little project. If you did, feel free to comment, like, subscribe, leave a message. You know I love to read them. And as always, keep an eye out for the next one.